All right, I think we'll get started and we'll see who trickles in. But welcome to this webinar. I'll just do the quick introduction and then we'll get a further introduction into our panelists here. So at Queen's, we always start all of our sessions acknowledging the land that we operate on. And so we acknowledge that Queen's University is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. We are grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. So I'm Kathryn Brohman. So my role here is I'm an associate professor in the area of digital technology, but I'm also the program director for a newly created program in about year 3 right now called the Master of Digital Product Management. And my co-director in the School of Computing, so this is a joint program between the Business School and the School of Computing, is Dr. Nicholas Graham, and he's not here with us today, but we do have one of his colleagues here, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we both play a role in setting the curriculum for that program and are happy to co-host this webinar across the 2 schools today. So I'm going to kick things off before I actually introduce our panelists. And really, this webinar sits in a pocket of webinars that really gets to this 70% number. And sadly, this number, I think, was generated by many different consulting organizations, call it, PwC, Deloitte, are all doing work in the space around the idea that organizations, have an aspiration to digitalize different parts of their business. But the failure rates on that are sadly not getting any better. In fact, year over year, they can get worse, they can get a little bit better, but we really don't know from a management perspective, how to manage this innovation well. And 2 of the top reasons for failure that I want to focus on today. So the one would be the classic kind of failure, the idea that the product itself doesn't actually meet the market demands. And that's the traditional view of product, right? Where we're really trying to think, well, if we build a product, if we can prime the market and actually get that market, to absorb the needs of that product, then the product will be successful. And that's only half of the story. The other half of the story really comes down to the second reason. And it's the idea that products themselves really struggle to adjust and scale to the growing customer demands and expectations. And this really is what brings the topic of this webinar to light, which comes into the whole idea that there's a whole back end to product management that many people think about with regard to the technology back end, the operational back end. And that's really what we're focusing on today, is what is the alignment between, the needs of the product and the ability to manage the back end operations to support the needs and growth of that product. And so in this space, it's also important that I highlight that there's 2 different ways that we define operations. And so the one thing that Nick and I have learned is that in the School of Computing and the School of Business, we often use the same words, but they mean very different things. And so on the business side, we call it product operations manager, is the person that kind of looks at the task flow, how the business side of things with regard to business processes, tasks, the workflows that exist around that. So that product comes in and we have to manage the change. And so really the product operations manager is looking a lot at, the streamlining the actual business process, understanding how to establish different KPIs in order to make sure that we get internal benefit from the product implementation, but that's product operations. And what we're really focused on today is something called DevOps. And so DevOps really comes down to managing the quality assurance of the technical product itself, the technology operations, which are, again, around the idea of the operations of how the technology actually works, and then aspects of the development cycle. And now why digital product management is so exciting and interesting is it really is a discipline that pulls together business and technical capabilities. And so in this webinar, we're focused on those operational capabilities. So DevOps, product ops, and how they actually come together. And that's really what we've called this set of panelists together to explore. So the reason why we launched this webinar was actually a previous webinar we ran, I think it was just before Christmas, if not in January, maybe. But Daniel Kennedy, who's the SVP and Chief Digital Officer at Definity Financial, actually said this in one of the webinars that we ran. And he said, the most successful products he's ever launched have always had a talented DevOps manager who understands the product and the business. And he made that very intentionally. Like he said, that DevOps person is a differentiator. And there's some DevOps people that are so very good at this. And when he finds one, he said he preserves them because they really do make the difference between success and failure. And so we grabbed onto that and we were like, hey, I wonder if we could unpack that a little bit further because that's such an interesting statement. And I think these three panelists will also help us understand what really Daniel was saying, the intention behind Daniel's statement. So here's where I'll sort of frame things, and then I'm going to pass it over to the panelists. But what makes ops engineers critical to the success of digital product and services? And that's really one thing I want to speak to the audience for today to think, well, how would you answer that? So certainly there are three kind of primary reasons. And so the first one is quality assurance. So ensuring that the product meets quality standards before being released into production or sold to customers. Certainly the QA side, definitely obvious in that diagram I showed you earlier. The second reason is for production. So the process of making a product at scale, often using automated processes and robotics. And so it's this whole idea of scaling a product really comes down to the importance of good quality and highly effective ops engineering. And then one of the ones that came out of our pre-discussion with these three panelists last week was this idea of distribution, which is the idea of like this, what usually you would see like a release engineer do, where they're kind of thinking, okay, this software is packaged and deployed in a way. And the coolest thing about digital products is that they're always living. They're always maturing, they're always growing, they're always changing. And so the DevOps engineer really becomes that person that thinks about how the software is initially packaged, what features will be in, what features will be out, but also deployed, right? So what features come on, what features go off. And in a lot of ways, they are the ones that are really managing the experience that users have with that product itself with regard to features. And so the question then becomes, do you agree? And that was really what I charged these three people with, was came up with this idea of this is what ops engineers are critical for. Do you agree? So each of them are going to tell you a bit of their, opinion on that question, as well as their own career with regard to how they've navigated through this space. So that's enough about me and my sort of intro. These are your panelists. And so we do have Bram here. So he's a professor and director of the MCIS lab and on maintenance, construction, and intelligent software at the School of Computing. So Dr. Adams is a colleague of Nick Graham. And so we're privileged to have him come in, and he's going to kick us off today and give us a bit more of an idea of DevOps and what it means at the sort of the intersection of product and DevOps. And then we have Tobias. So he's a director of risk engineering at RBC. And we've really asked Tobias to really explain to us, as a DevOps engineer, what his career looked like, right? Where he came from, how he aspires to make the next move in his own career. But he's going to tell us a bit of a story about where he sees himself fit, how he operates at RBC on the product team, kind of what he brings that's special and exciting, and also share with us a little bit about what it, how his role impacts other roles within the product team. And then we have Jeevan, who's the SVP Technology Innovation Operations at Cineplex Digital Media. And he's going to be our anchor for today. And really his job is going to be to really pull together what Bram has brought to the table and Tobias kind of the experience and bring us into a closing kind of description about different ways where he sees DevOps really critical to the launch of successful products. And then he's also going to share a little bit about, his journey and how he got to his position over the years. And so these are our panelists. And so one thing, just housekeeping, there is a Q&A that you have access to. We try to make this as interactive as we can. So I'll be operating in the back end on the Q&A. I've also asked the panelists to put their hand up if they have something that they want to add. So we have about 50 minutes together, and so we'd like to make this as interactive as we can. All right, so with that, this is the agenda. Sort of tell us your story, what makes ops engineers critical to the success of products. Why did you venture into product, and what skills do you need to develop along the way? That's what we're trying to articulate to you. So clearly, if you have any questions about that, or if we can unpack those any further, do let us know in the Q&A. All right. So first things first here, I'm going to turn it over to Bram to to get us started.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the introduction and the invitation. So as introduced already, I'll be talking a lot here about the overlap between successful DevOps leaders and their activities and product management activities. And I'll do that with a couple of stories, but I'll also at the end tell a bit more about what maybe are additional skills that are needed on top of that to kind of really evolve to like today's new disruptive technologies. So on the next slide, I'll start with the first story. And so all of these are kind of going back a bit to like historical DevOps success stories. And the first one is John Odin, who was the lead release engineer at the very popular and still very popular open source browser, Firefox, by the Mozilla organization. So Mozilla had to really compete in a very, very competitive domain with some really big corporations. Microsoft, Google, each of them have their own browsers. And what John, as head of this lead engineering DevOps team, noticed was that there were a lot of kind of issues at the business level, at the product level actually, that really disrupted things. For instance, the when there was like a chem spill, that means like a release which like a huge showstopper bug or like big vulnerability, it would take often weeks to actually ship the fixed version to all the clients, not because the developers were slow, but just because there was a lot of improvisation, manual testing, manual kind of quality assurance, ad hoc release procedures. Nothing was really, it was a release was an exceptional event actually. And the same thing happened for new features, like where the competition would regularly have new releases with new features. It took them sometimes 1.5 years to get like a new release with a big feature out. Again, because there were so many ad hoc things and so on. And what John did was he made the case, did a pitch to actually the management level to bring the release cycle down to 6 and actually nowadays 4 weeks to have more regular releases and as such be more agile in terms of dealing with the clients. But there was more on the next slide, for instance. So to make that possible, he had to do a lot of kind of pushing for a lot of automation, a lot of investments actually to automate all the testing, most of it to automate the whole packaging and deployment process. But he was successful in convincing to make that argument. And the other thing, another reason why it worked out was that he realized that DevOps is a cross-cutting activity. You have to, all the product teams have to, are affected by it. You have to talk to all of them, lots of meetings. His own team was actually fully remote. That was like pre-COVID for sure. They call themselves remotees. So he also invested a lot of time in better kind of building practices for effective communication. I even wrote a book of it, about it. So again, there were a lot of activities that are kind of quite in common with what product management operations is doing. The second story is kind of like from a different perspective. This is actually at a big corporation, Facebook. And this is about Chuck Rossi, who was the engineering director of release engineering and DevOps at the time. And his story is interesting. Like he always claimed, and actually it's correct, that he had full control to make go, no-go decisions regarding new features in Facebook, both the web application and the mobile. The web application, for instance, every 12 hours had a new release. So he was the one, together with his team, which was kind of relatively small, actually, surprisingly, for a big company that big. And he had the final say, saying, okay, this feature is ready, or no, you have to do more testing or anything. And at the minimum, wait 12 hours, maybe more until it's ready. And why? Because through the years, he had learned the hard way that any bad decision could lead to a bad release going out to millions of users. That one was very messy to roll back and so on. So he really fought hard again for automation. Also, in a like required his team to have a very thorough understanding of the whole architecture and the priorities of different components. But also he requested full autonomy. So he was not under any product team. He was actually immediately under the CEO, who's still the same person. which actually goes both ways. It's not just saying he's autonomous, but he actually had to justify and be able to justify at the product and the business level why a certain feature, which might have been critical for for the business, would not ship because of technical reasons. So you have to make that bridge technical to that level, and even had ways to evaluate the risk of a certain developer contributing certain changes. If a developer made too many bad code changes, they would get a higher karma level. Above a certain threshold, they would no longer be allowed to ship that product or that change, which is kind of annoying if you're a developer. The last story I'll just briefly mention is basically that every DevOps team also has some kind of way to do A/B testing, where basically you have to be able to define for a certain feature, a certain experiment for a certain group of users. You have to quantify with actual metrics the value of that feature and the usefulness. And for instance, you put the chat window on the left or on the right of the screen, what is most valuable to users. So they're also, these DevOps teams also very versed in capturing this kind of measure of value and having whole automated tools to let people run these experiments. However, so there's a lot of kind of overlap between both fields, but there's also kind of new opportunities, for instance, and new challenges, because, for instance, there's in the next slide, if you look at the domain of AI, for instance, again, a very low success rate of products. Like some people say half of them don't make it. Some people say less than 20% actually succeed. So more than 8% actually fail. That's very difficult. So actually being able to see and kind of pursue value, business value in these new disruptive technologies is a very important thing. Even successful DevOps engineers have to really continue working on finding new skills there. And the other thing, and again, I'll illustrate with AI, but it's again for any other new technology, is that it's very important to be able to coordinate across disciplines. So as the next slide is showing, for instance, you have the DevOps people, but at the same time, you have now for AI, DataOps, MLOps, MLOps kind of domains, and you have to really be able to, again, communicate and collaborate effectively, bringing them into the existing tech stacks and other kind of cross-disciplinary teams that are already there. So being able to do that in an effective way and coming up with products that are high quality and successful, that's really important skills to master. So these were kind of my my views. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bram. And so certainly if you have any questions for Dr. Adams, you can put them right in there in the chat, because he is now done for his formal part of the presentation. But it's even interesting, just as a thought-provoking, as we were talking, Bram, when I think about, as just a simple user of these tools, that the technical capabilities really is one of those things that really shuts users down. Right. So you think about it can be the greatest feature with regard to giving me, theoretically what I want or what I need. But when you just have that, the technical performance, it's so users are getting more and more, our expectations are getting higher and higher with regard to what we'll tolerate and what we won't. And so it just speaks to that idea of this concept of this intersection and importance of ops engineering, right? Being at the forefront. All those stories kind of spoke to that idea of being the forefront of our own user experience, right? And at the end of the day. And so this is really what we want to move on to now. So Tobias is again, the director of risk engineering at RBC. And we gave him a little bit of a different challenge in preparation for today's webinar, because I think the people that are joining us today are, similar to him. He is working in this space. He is, he'll tell you a bit about his background in terms of where he came from and how he ended up in DevOps. But what we really wanted to learn from Tobias was, what is this journey, right? And how does he make the impact day in and day out at RBC for the products that they're creating and launching? And then really giving us an idea of maybe some of the skills, Tobias, that you think make you, good at your job, and kind of, good to know whether or not you would want to venture more into the product space itself. So thank you again for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Kathryn. I'm going to tell you a bit about my story, and then I'll hopefully answer all those questions. When I was about 10 years old, I taught myself to program. And the reason for that, the big motivation, was I wanted to build my own video games. I was fascinated by the idea of moving a little stick figure across the screen, turning an idea into something real. And that feeling of bringing an idea to life sparked a passion in me, one that still drives me today. Whether it's a personal project, something that generates revenue, or a solution that makes the developers' lives easier, I find immense joy in transforming ideas into reality. As an ops engineer, I might not have been building video games, but I was solving problems, seeing the direct impact of my solution. What made this role especially powerful was the broad visibility it gave me. I was involved in nearly every phase of a project, setting up new pipelines for product launches, scaling infrastructure, and optimizing deployments. That level of exposure allowed me to make meaningful contributions at almost every stage. One of my earliest major contributions was in my first job, where we had a client-server architecture, and that sort of limited us to just 1 or 2 updates per year. The reason for that was we had to physically visit every branch across the country to install updates. I led an initiative to change our architecture, so this allowed us to update these servers remotely from our headquarters, which have saved a lot of time from people having to drive out, do these updates. And this shift enabled us and product to roll out smaller, more frequent updates, dramatically improving the efficiency of what we were doing. Throughout my career, I've sort of found myself leading transformational projects, and this often centered around DevOps adoption. At RBC, for example, I worked at a team transitioning from deploying monolithic applications once a quarter to a more agile, cloud-based approach. Cloud deployments were new for most of us at that time. So as we learned, we also evolved our development practices. This sort of meant our approaches and especially our documentation got outdated fast. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when I introduced the concept of platform engineering to try and get out of the cycle. By adopting platform engineering, we streamlined our development processes. Previously, sort of setting up a new repository in a project could take days, with developers navigating outdated documentation and hunting for dependencies. With this new approach, a new project could be deployed with proper configurations and be production ready within 15 minutes. This consistency and automation made a huge difference in developer productivity, as well as delivering features to customers. For those unfamiliar with platform engineering, it essentially builds on DevOps principles by adding a layer of orchestration, and treating internal developer tools as products. This was a pivotal realization for me. If developers are the customers of these tools, then we need to approach them with a product mindset. If they don't find these tools useful or user-friendly, they won't adopt them, and we lose the intended benefits. And this sort of was my real first step into product management. That transition became even more pronounced when I led the inner source program at RBC. Inner source applies open source principles within an organization, fostering internal collaboration and code sharing. And in this role, I had to fully embrace a product management mindset. I had multiple customer segments: executives who needed to see the business value of inner source adoption, and developers who needed to understand how it would make their work easier and help them grow their skills. Managing this initiative also meant making strategic decisions about how to allocate resources and prioritize efforts. Whether it was planning talks, organizing conferences, or developing digital tools to support adoption, I had to evaluate what would bring the most value. This is where I truly stepped into the world of product management. Moving from engineering into product management required me to develop new skills and ways of thinking. First, I had to gain a deeper understanding of different customer perspectives. As an ops engineer, my customers were fairly predictable. They told me what they needed, and I built the solutions. As a product manager, I had to shift to a mindset of discovering customer needs, not just reacting to them. Second, I had to refine how I communicated. When speaking with business leaders or customers, I needed to translate technical concepts into business terms they could understand and relate to. Learning about business fundamentals like accounting, marketing, risk management was invaluable. Books like the 10-Day MBA, YouTube videos, and short courses all helped me bridge the gap between technology and business strategy. and I finally had to learn to step back from technical details. While my engineering background gave me an advantage, my job was no longer to write the code or build the infrastructure. It was to guide the vision, strategy, and execution of products that would drive impact. This transition from ops engineering to product management wasn't just about changing roles. It was about expanding my perspective. At its core, both roles share a common thread: solving problems in a way that delivers meaningful value. My journey has shown me that whether you're building infrastructure, developer tools, or a new product, the ability to understand customer needs, make strategic decisions, and execute effectively is what truly makes an impact. And that's my story. Thank you.
And that's a great story. So thank you so much for sharing that. I am intrigued. I was actually writing down a number of things that I'll ask you after we let Jeevan talk. But I think the one observation, just as you I'll plant the seed and then you can think about it a little bit, is the idea of if you were never given that opportunity, Tobias, to be able to really think about this platform engineering opportunity within RBC where they charged you with that, would you have ever made the leap? Right. So is it that idea that it's a fairly technical product that brings this to you? Because I think it's interesting how many probably business-oriented product people probably couldn't have done what you did, on the platform side of things. So it's kind of thinking about, I'm always intrigued with this idea of, can business-oriented people learn enough about technology to be effective in the product space? And then, if you had to go one way or the other, kind of which way, what benefits get generated from you go from business into product versus technology into product. So we can definitely explore that a little bit more as we go through to the Q&A section. So thank you for that. And I will start my sharing again here as I introduce our next panelist. And so moving on. So Jeevan's the SVP of Technology Innovation Operations at Cineplex Digital Media, and he has put a couple slides together for us that are two very simple slides, but a very complicated, I think it's the first time I've ever seen, his speaking notes being much longer than his actual slides. And so thanks again to him to, as I said, serve as our anchor for today and tell us a little bit more about what he thinks about the intersection as well as his own journey. And so over to Jeevan.
Thanks, Kathryn. So to the first question about, is product management critical? I'd say yes, it's fundamentally critical. But I'm going to just start off by saying I had no idea what product management is when I started my career. I had no idea whatsoever. I came to that answer and that conclusion organically. And much of what Bram and Tobias has said already, I can see already reflected within my own career. So I'm going to try and tell you a little bit of my story and what I think is important and the value of product management in sort of three different stories, three different types of stories. So the first storyline is the worker life cycle. So I did an electrical engineering degree. I was a classic individual contributor, learned my skill, was good at debugging and all that kind of stuff. But then this first really sort of big journey or step in my way on the way to product management was when I had this expanding involvement. What I mean by that is literally I was good at problem solving. So people would call me up in customer success and say, hey, we got a really hot customer. Can you come and join us and try and talk the customer down, try and make sure that you explain things. So I learned to develop a bit of a calm style and an even approach about going through that. Later on, I was good at that. So they were happy. They said, oh, you're so great at product, dealing with irate customers. Hey, can you actually help us write the manuals about how things should be deployed in the fields? This is the day of, good old paper manuals. I know that's not the thing anymore. So I did a lot of marketing work. That led to other things. I did, legal contracts and so on. Bottom line is, as Tobias said, I had an expanding set of knowledge over time as still working in engineering discipline, still building products from a technology point of view, but I was expanding across the business. So that started to really make a difference as I got more and more senior in my career. It started to make a really big difference in my leadership sort of style. So I wasn't just a technical leader anymore. I was this technical leader who had this broad base of experience. I think Tobias has described that well. You end up being and seeing the business. And what really is important, but as you've seen and experienced that people think and act and behave with your products and your solutions in different ways. So that helped expand my knowledge of, my leadership skills, and that ended up being a strong piece. So I learned through that early stage of dealing with issues that I really wanted to deal with stuff proactively rather than reactively. Everybody's been through firefighting, or you will in your career. You typically experience problems, and then everybody's in firefighting mode. I thought there's got to be a better way. You got to be able to design products that meet the needs and of the market in some proactive measure. I happen to have a good boss that thought, well, you should try product management. Product management combines all these skills of all your technical background. It's a proactive facing thing. You're influencing where the product goes and how it goes. The operational paradigm is critical to that. Give it a go. And so I ended up doing some formal courses in product management. I absolutely loved it at the intersection of all things. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I just want to make one last point on the worker life cycle, that product management, my technical background and my operational background, that fueled this large base of technical knowledge. Product management brought this discipline of bringing it all together. And I think Tobias, again, sort of represented that in what he was talking about. But that made a huge impact in my executive leadership hat. Now I'm on a senior sort of level. That product management, that intersection of product management and technology has really helped me on my executive leadership side. So just as almost as a career tip, there is just a fundamental value in being product management with your technical background. It's a great set of skills to carry in business, which takes me to my second story track, which is talking a little bit about the different industries. I've worked in different industries. If you just sort of glance through those red circles, big, small, large, whatever. The primary story I want to tell you here is that in each of these different companies, in each of the different products, it doesn't matter what you do, but in my case, I learned that there are different operational paradigms which matter. In the middle, you can see one which is digital projection, a specialty market. Those were live events where it was always this thing about the show must go on. So you have products in the field, you're doing these large, massive event productions, and your products just have to run. Bram talked about some of the ways about the way you handle release cycles and the way you handle deployment to the field. We learned there in digital projection that understanding how to best tie that to live events, we spent a lot of time figuring out what is the right way for event management companies to do that. In streaming and in the large companies, stability of service was really the biggest paradigm we had to go through. We had to look at the frequency of releases. We had to look at what's the right ratio to be in the field, but you always had to make sure the service was up and running. And typically there was a very low risk tolerance for anything going down, and reputational damage, again, as Bram mentioned in the sort of early stages. Everybody's got their own career cycle story. You'll go through that over time. But what I really want to say about your industry life cycle is, from an operational paradigm, in each of these jobs, regardless of the company, it made such a massive difference to the experience that the clients and the users had about deciding how to manage a production lifecycle, for example. And then also even making decisions like dealing with technical debt. It's not a big thing I was going to talk about, but sometimes as a product manager, you're deciding how much technical debt are you going to take on. Again, you're talking about evolution of a product and a roadmap over time that has profound business influence over whether you get stuck eventually having so much technical debt you cannot make a major jump forward, and it can actually be very detrimental to a product. So something just to consider. The third sort of storyline, again, on my path to product management, again, this belief that it's so fundamentally important to a great career and to me personally. The very first thing is that software rules the world. I'm just saying sort of what is obvious everybody, but I trained as an electrical engineer. I was used to building things. I quickly realized that you could never show off the power of your hardware unless the software was doing something in some useful way for a user. So a physical product in its environment was the most important thing, and the way people interacted through the product was through software. So that was an early lesson. And ever since then, it can never underestimate the power of good UX design and customer experience design in that respect. The second sort of aha moment in sort of my career and leading towards product management was that when you put on different hats and you work in different parts of the business and you see that people think and interact with your products differently, that I just had this natural sense of curiosity, but why? So I'd always ask why 5 times. That led to engagement when I talked first to clients and users. I'd ask them, why is this a problem? How would you like it? And I learned things like that. Then as I talked to different groups and different departments within my companies that I worked at, that led to more engagement. People would give me their perspectives from their different departmental views about what makes a great product and why. And then finally, having all those skills really paid out, as I said before, in leadership style. I also learned quickly along the way that there are so many different types of users and clients. When you try to look at it from a persona, from a market perspective, it's a complex beast. It's easy to say that I'm going to have 5 different personas. I'm going to build a product for the 5 types of users. But typically, there are people who are deploying and using the product operationally, not just the end users of the technical thing that you're doing. So you really have to design for them as well, because they're the ones who actually pay the bills that buy the product the next time, especially if you're talking about corporate level, large IT infrastructure projects and so on. I'm also old enough to say that while I knew that software was important, the join of dev and ops was something that was relatively new during my career sort of life cycle. So in that union, I started to understand and appreciate the value of the operational paradigm in respect to development. I happened to join a company, at one company on the way, did some training for product management, but this pragmatic marketing framework spoke to me. And what it spoke to me was, it was the union of strategy against the market and clients, against technology, and against the way you choose to go out and sell your product. I, as an engineer, built these amazing products, but I really wanted them to do well in the market. And so in product management, that's where you really have that control. So I spoke about being proactive, first of all, rather than reactive, and then at the core of that product management piece, being in the center of all this activity. And so that's how I end up organically coming to this conclusion that product management is absolutely critical. So I spend a lot of time as I give career counseling to people in my companies that I've worked at. Some people say, what is product management and why? I often say it is a great way to be at the center of decision-making of strategy, and it's a great stepping point to come into senior leadership if that's where your ambition is. There's room for deep technical discipline, but it's a great place to be. So with that, that's how I got to product management. It's a bit of a long-winded story. So just to go to the next slide, I'll just tell you, okay, so now you're in the ops engineering side, you already have an unfair starting advantage. And Kathryn asked a question of Tobias for consideration. I'll do one preamble answer. Is it better to start technically or start business-wise? I tell even my kids, I say, listen, business is hard and it takes a certain amount of discipline, but you can learn that on the way. The technical discipline, spend your time there first, build that technical depth of knowledge, and then branch out over time into your business practice and learn that over time. Because your technical understanding, your ability to traverse deeply vertically, to be able to handle complex multivariable problems, to handle the complexities of unknown technical environments. How many of us, if you've ever had to deploy a product into an unknown network environment, again, the things you don't know, they're all dealing with these complex problems. That is your secret super sauce, your unfair advantage. Your technical knowledge will serve you so well during your career. But what do you do? How do you turn that into a product management? Well, you have to be able to scale that knowledge back up. You have to be able to tell your stories, all the technical world, at a very horizontal level, and in different voices to different companies. I talked about all those different groups and departments that I understood and learned over time. I learned to tell the same story 5 different ways. And that to me is one of the chief, it's not what product management is, but it is a skill that aids you well in the product management, is the ability to put on different hats and tell the product story, tell the solution story, tell the operational story, but in different voices to different audiences. So that's an underlying skill. Another underlying skill, as I mentioned in the other slide, was curiosity. If you're the kind of person who wants to know the why, and typically I find technical people are, because you typically are, when you're presented with a problem, the first time you've ever met with a complex multivariable problem, you typically have to go deep and ask yourself why, and eventually, you know, through root cause analysis, whatever, you come to the answer. That same trait of underlying asking why is so fundamental to the product management equation. And again, both Bram and Tobias, I think, mentioned that in different ways. You're often trying to discover, even Kathryn, I think you said at the beginning, right? You're trying to discover what's going on, not just react to it. And so that asking why is a super important underlying skill. For tried and true advice, you know, I mentioned about being, you know, harness your vertical depth of knowledge in a horizontal way. That's just one point. Second point is, I talked about different voices, different points of view. Again, keep that in your mind, that that's what a good product manager has, is the ability to traverse a problem in different domains and different slices or cuts, however you want to frame it. It's important. UX and CX experience, user experience design, that's also a fundamental, even if you're in a technical domain and that's where you choose to stay, take the time and effort to learn about UX principles and what that means and how that can fundamentally change the engagement of the product. And even from an operational paradigm, even if you're not worried about the product's features and with the things it does, think about how it operates in the environment that it's going to be. Think about who's deploying it. Think about it from their lens. That'll make a huge difference. And then, as I mentioned, the last sort of tried and true advice, if you eventually, you know, I love to be a hero firefighter. A technical problem came up, I could solve it. That was great. But after doing it like 100 million times, I thought there's got to be a better way. And so my point about being proactive and being able to solve these things in advance, again, this is where product management can harness that power and deliver a great solution. The avoiding the trap story, I just want to make one passion plea. I said about speaking in different voices and all that stuff. Engineers by nature, myself included, we love precision, we love exactness, we love the devil's in the details. We're often used to saying that, hey, there's some corner cases here. When you're in a product management mode and you're speaking in different voices, know that sometimes an 80% approximation is all you need to convey to an audience enough of what they need to know to move forward. Again, it's your superpower. You have all this great depth of technical knowledge. You'll understand the reality of what's going to go on in an operational paradigm. If you do this, this might happen or whatever. Sometimes you have to not dumb it down, it sounds mean, but simplify it or slightly approximate it so that your audience can easily ingest it and consider that in a product decision matrix. Like, what are you going to do and why? So in other words, don't kill your audience with details and the what ifs and every single detail. Make sure you can sort of scale up and down in your explanations about what's going on. All to close by saying many paths to leadership and success. In my experience, I would have had a perfectly fine, happy career going the product management, staying on a technical route and being a technical leader and so on. But life became so powerful and so exciting to be at the the middle of everything in product management world, because you're influencing technology, you're influencing the technology teams, you're influencing everybody at some level about deciding why and how this thing's to go. So if that's the kind of person you are, you want to ultimately lead, the intersection of product management, DevOps, DataOps, all these stories, it is just a fantastic place to lead a career. So that's my plug for product management. And yeah, thanks for listening to my story.
Thank you, Jeevan. I think I do have one question for you before I'm just going to stop sharing here so we can all come on screen. But the one thing that you mentioned in your slides was on the pathway to leadership. And you did say that your choice to go into product had paved the way for you to go into those more senior roles, right? And can you just explain that a little bit further? Like, what is it about the product space that allows you to really find likeness to other C-suite executives, whether it be the chief financial officer or chief operations officer? Like, what is it about product that makes it more helpful for you to relate to those people?
It's a great question, and I'll answer it in this way. You have to visualize this for me. So if you think about product management, you have one lens out to the world where you are going through you're going to the users, you're going to the markets. You're fundamentally looking outward. You sit in your seat and you look outward towards the market, typically interfacing with sales and marketing people along the way. But you're fundamentally asking yourself questions about, well, why? Why should I build this product versus that product? Which is the way I should go? So you have this outward facing to that world. You, at the same time, are at a product management seat. You're typically looking inward to the organization. You're looking at the technology teams, the people who build and design things, and you're telling them, why should I build this? What should it do? How do you represent the voice of the client, of the user? How do you build these things? And so you have typically technical teams and operational teams asking you 100 million questions. But if you can picture my diagram, it all puts product management at the funnel, at the center point, sorry, of two funnels on either side. And if you consider a third dimension to that, you actually have an executive team, or typically a large stakeholder pool, who need to understand what's going on with the product, why, what's the roadmap, what's the go-to-market strategy, and all that stuff. You are typically explaining that in a strategic way to the leadership teams, and you're typically trying to convince them. So really, to sort of make it a simpler answer, you're in product management is typically at the very core center of all this activity. If you like communicating, making decisions, understanding all these different paradigms and use cases, and you like to sort of level up the way you talk, both tech talk as well as, executive speak, I'll call it, for the sake of it's a great place to be. You end up with a lot of fundamental knowledge. Everybody's like, oh, wow, you know everything. And you become basically the center go-to person of everything. And that's just paid out huge for me. And it pays out a lot of dividends for a lot of people I see in executive level roles. This ability to span a wide universe really makes a difference in decision-making frameworks.
Well, and I think too, like I've seen it be defined as a breaking point, right? When the two funnels come together, and I think Bram would probably advocate for a third funnel coming in on the data side, where you see the data skills, the technical skills, the business skills all coming into this very small intersection breaking point. And I think that, back to my slide on 70% of these things are failing, one could very well argue that it's not any of those kind of areas that are failing, but it's what's happening at the intersection of those things that are really just not able to orchestrate and make decisions in the right direction to bring all those things in perspective. So the one thought I had too, before I move on to my questions, was, in your slide that you had curiosity, engagement, leadership. I wonder if that second one is actually possibility, because I think that the one thing that makes, really, to me, unique people in this space are people who take their curiosity and translate that into possibility. Because so many times people tell you why it can't happen, right? No, that could never do that. We could never do this. You could never. And what I find so unique about product people, and especially on the technical side, because I think a lot of business people see possibility. But for me, being a business person interfacing with technology people, technical people that really see things as possible, like it's like a little puzzle that they're going to figure out how to make it work, I think are amazingly valuable people, because there's so many people that start with why it won't work, right? And that just, when you're trying to innovate and come up with new ways of doing things, you just get stuck. So I loved
just want to add to that, 100% agree. And I will say, like, one of the realities of typically of the organizations that I've had to work in at a more senior level, it's just that. It's product management typically is full of the possibilities you said, and it's the mind shift. And there's a bit of a risk aversion sort of model typically in an operational paradigm. So just getting teams to be consciously aware of where a risk mindset framework is blocking you from possibility. Product management's typically good ones can just unlock with these help operational people and technology people in general open up and expand the art of the possible. A lot of startups have done very well through that sort of a side of things, for sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to pick up on your comment that you made to your kids. So I have 5 kids myself, and I have raised them the same way. I'm gonna say if you're gonna learn technology, learn it young, because when you're old like me, it gets a lot harder. And I think that whole idea of which way do you come, even in the program, the people that come in from the technical side, the avenue of possibility, because they can go into a big tech company like Amazon or Facebook, and because they're working on these tech products. Whereas even in banking, Tobias, it's still like banking is so quickly becoming a technology business, right? And I think, the people that come on the business side struggle a bit more because they can't they can work on products that are tech enabled, but not tech products themselves, like true tech products. So my question is really I think Bram can offer a great insight on this because he's teaching all of these students in technology space. But I'm going to start with Tobias. Because what is it about technical people? What is the barrier to learn business? Because I think sometimes it's like people think, they think the only avenue is an MBA, or they think, but when you're a technical person and you're like, you listen to a webinar like this, and Jeevan says, you get your technical skills and then you venture into the business space. What are the biggest barriers for technical people to venture into the business side of things? What do you think, Tobias?
I wouldn't sort of say it's a skill. It's more just a push to get into that business side. I sort of found the reason I sort of started looking into some of the business stuff was in one of the startups, we did a lot of consulting work. And when talking to customers, I was sort of forced into, well, I need to be able to speak, they speak, and talk, they talk. And that sort of realization is sort of what got me into that. If I sort of have to look at, let's say, other technical people, I think it's maybe because it's not technical and it might not sound fun. And it might not sound like, why would I want to learn about marketing or risk or accounting? Like, what's the fun in that? What problem am I solving with that? So I sort of think going back to, well, learning this skill will help you still solve this problem, and having that mindset will probably help change it. But I think it probably sounds boring for technical people to get into it, but there's a lot of value in that. And even not just business things, what I've sort of learned, and Jim also sort of mentioned that, is having a wide range of skills and a wide range of knowledge helps you to solve problems. Because if you can sort of take something that you've learned from risk management and bring this into a DevOps problem, that sort of really adds value, and that sort of really makes you stick out and say, well, you thought a bit differently about this. You is doing something different than other people. So business should just be one of those other avenues that as an engineer, you kind of get into and you learn from, and you sort of take what you've learned from them and bring this back into the way you do your engineering.
Yeah. So interesting. And I think that monetization of value, right, Tobias, because it's like, engineering people will create value. Like if it's a really cool idea, or this is a way we should do things, in banking, for example, why don't we do things? But then you have to get to the monetization piece about getting companies to actually do this stuff, right? Which is a whole other, cluster of understanding. And I think it's interesting that I love that you were like, it's seemingly boring. Right. And I think the other thing is I've heard soft, like business is soft. Right. And I think it is part of the just the misunderstanding between these disciplines. And so, Bram, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, and we're in a safe space here, so please do be candid.
Well, okay, thanks for clarifying that. Well, so I would not say, so the term boring has been used. I would actually use the term intimidating, because if I hear product management, that sounds like, whoa, that's kind of like from a technical point of view, kind of very intimidating. And actually, it reminds me a bit like in open source development. So there've been a lot of kind of that's been open source has been on like from the 90s and even from the last century, basically. And there have been theories about why people actually start open source projects, why they start building these communities, open source and ecosystems. And there's competing theories. One theory is basically the scratch your own itch model, where basically people, again, they're also intimidated by, oh, an open source project, I have to contribute, people see what I do. But then they encounter some kind of project they work on or they use, like a product they use themselves. And they really like it, and there's a problem with it, and they want to fix it. There's an itch, and they start scratching that itch by a small contribution, a bigger contribution, and so on. And similar to like how Jeevan kind of did this career path there. You dabble a bit in it, and at some point you can link these kind of bigger questions to like your own technical interest. And I think that's when the click comes and you kind of say like, okay, it's just a name, it's a label, but the kind of things it means, like product manager is really, I like these things actually, because they scratch an itch. So I think maybe you need to rebrand the term, but anyway.
So yeah, I think we just get management right out of it, right, Bram? Call it something different and see. Because I think it is like even the management capabilities within product are quite technical. Like when I teach strategy, for example, it's not just arm waving, and coming up with ideas. To create product strategy, it's quite a technical space. And I think you have to be able to build out your strategies from the capabilities that you have. And that's just all very much more computational in its thinking approach than it is more creative, I would say. It's all creativity. It's just different ways of thinking. But I appreciate it because I think, Bram, I think intimidation is they're like two different worlds. Trying to bring them together is very challenging. Even in our own walls here at Queen's, it's not the easiest because we operate out of totally different faculties. So the last question then, and I think maybe Jeevan, I'll start with you. One thing that intrigued me was this idea that we use the same word, right? In DevOps, we use, development and operations coming together and you get DevOps. And I was intrigued to say, like, you saw that happen in your career, that merger happen. On the business side of things, there are these other operational people that kind of look at the workflow, like how that product's going to change internal workflows and what it means for the internal implementation of that product to embed itself within the day-to-day processes. Who is it on the business side that like a DevOps person would work with to understand the other side of this whole thing on the operations? Like, is it a business analyst? And maybe, yeah, I don't know who it is.
Yeah, actually, it's a question. It's a good question, but it's going to stump me a little bit because we actually are searching for that a little bit right now.
Yeah.
I'll say it like this. My experience right now in this sort of state of the art of things, when we have DevOps people seeking to go through and want to understand the outside world a bit more, the technical skills that we sort of encounter on the outside get less and less. So IT departments from client companies, technical people and so on, they have speak a specific language, but typically there's a sales channel involved in the middle. And so somehow something gets lost in that pipe. I talked about being in that center in that pipe. We're actually now advocating to save time, to have product management and the DevOps people sit directly with the clients in conversation just for the straight out exposure, because it's not, I don't have an easy answer to get to break some of those. Everything gets lost in translation along the way. And it is such a specific technical paradigm. I think there's a strong business case for having deeply technical people learn a skill set or two about the proper way to talk to customers, not to say everything that's on your mind, but to bring them right up front and plant them right in that. It's the only way you can gain the insight directly. And we're finding that this funnel has a bit of a problem with it. It's an info choke point. So not answering your question,
So
kind of describing what's going on for me right now that I'm trying to figure out how to fix.
Yeah, it's almost like the early days of Agile where we would just, put the client directly in touch with the developer because it was like, how do you actually translate the requirements, right? Tobias, do you have any insights as to how that works at RBC?
So oftentimes because we're not in that startup mode too much at RBC, so oftentimes when we're planning things, it's sort of planned a few months, maybe a year or so in advance of something happening. When we start building it, it's quite agile, but that it gets to this. So oftentimes we involve DevOps already at that starting point as well, so they can understand sort of, this is the end goal that we want to build. This is how we want to get there. So they've got a better understanding of what is required and they can give their input to that as well. So at that point, you will bring them in quite early if it's sort of something new. If it's an existing project, it might be a bit of a gap as well. But we sort of try and, one of the other ways I'm just sort of thinking of as well is we try and keep things consistent in the way we do things. So oftentimes you can piggyback on something that was done before, or you can build on instead of starting from scratch. So being a big organization, having done this a few times, we oftentimes lean on other projects and other processes or tools or people and bring them in to help taking this further without having to learn or reinvent the wheel on things as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And I think I know that you've got, I think Daniel's actually on the call. Your Dan Cooper is one of our guests from RBC, because I know even like RBC works with squads, right? And I'm going to talk about that in a future webinar, but I think it comes to this idea of how you structure your product team and to Jeevan's point, and then how you operationalize that product team with regard to how they handle the front end. But I think there's something interesting to unpack there in a future webinar as well. So I just want to take this time. We are at the top of the hour, and this is a QR code for any of you in the audience that have questions about the product, about the program itself. So at Queen's, of course, we are the first to market with the Master of Digital Product Management, which a number of these, panelists today were referring to. And a future webinar we're going to do on Monday, March 3rd tells you more about that program. So these are the people that run that webinar and can get deeper into the program itself, its offerings, how it's structured, and that kind of thing. And so we do encourage you to join one of those webinars if that's something, if the program has intrigued you at all. But just to close this out, this is an extremely interesting topic. I think we can all agree. I also wonder whether or not we should write an insight article for Smith around this topic by engaging a number of these panelists, because I think this intersection between, again, Jeevan talking about ops and development coming together, I think this is something's coming together here. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's early stages. And I do thank the panel for helping us kind of discover what's inside that space. So it is Monday for those of you who are operating in a Monday to Friday work week. It's the beginning of the week. And we do really thank you for joining us and allowing us to inspire your thoughts so early in the week. Hopefully we caught you at a time when things aren't too busy. Sometimes we run them end of the week and we lose people. So thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your week. And please do join us on one of our future webinars. Thanks again to the panelists. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.